All right, I think we're ready to go live here. Just a minute or so before scheduled. Sorry, it's been a little while. I was planning to do test out some new equipment that I had here over the holidays, and turned out I was just having too many problems getting that going, and got distracted by the Christmas break and a number of other things family-wise. So sorry I didn't. This has been the first live stream since our last one that we had, and it's been a couple weeks. So. It'll be good to catch up here and kind of get back into the swing of things. Just a real quick reminder, this is an Ask Me Anything live stream, and when you type in questions either down below or on the side, it'll show up like this when I'm trying to answer the question, and I'll click on it and highlight it so that you know what question I'm trying to do my best to answer at that period of time. And we'll get into that in a few minutes. There were a couple little things I wanted to do just before I do that. And this is kind of going back into a couple things that I've promised that I would do in the past more, and I'll try to do it more efficiently when I'm doing my live streams. And one of them is I was going to go over a couple of the events that I'll be doing over the next couple weeks here, places that I'll be speaking at. And next Thursday, or actually this Thursday here, the 9th, so coming up in a couple days, I'll be doing a lunch presentation at the Kitsap Women's Republican Club. I didn't write down exactly where that is, but it's going to be wherever they have their regular meetings out in Kitsap County, and that's usually around the lunchtime. So I know I'm going to be out there on Thursday. Next Tuesday, I'll be at the East Side Republican Club, which is at the Hilton Inn out in Redmond. It'll be at the hotel out there, and I believe it's in their little conference room that you go into when you're there. It's been a little while since I've been there. I think that meeting starts at 6:30. I'll probably be speaking around 7 o'clock or so. Also, this is the Roanoke Conference on the 24th to the 26th, last weekend of the month, basically, and I'll be out there at the Roanoke Conference as well. So I am on the board of the Roanoke Conference, so I'm excited to see a lot of people. I don't think they're quite sold out yet, but it's getting close. So if you haven't signed up for the Roanoke Conference, do that. It's a great opportunity to come out and network in Ocean Shores, and it's at the Convention Center in Ocean Shores. And they usually, in the last number of years, we've sold out pretty early, and it's getting close to that time if they haven't. But go ahead and get online and register if you haven't done so and you're planning to go, because I know they were getting really close to being sold out if they haven't sold out already. So if you are there and you do watch my live streams, please make a point of coming up and telling me that you do, and just introducing yourself in case we haven't met before. The Roanoke Conference is a great chance to get together with you and your 600 and some odd closest friends who are conservative activists, or at least Republican-leaning or center-leaning in the state, and care about politics. It's a great opportunity for you to get together with people like that and do it over a weekend's time in a fairly informal setting. And it'll be fun to see many of you out there, and I'm looking forward to doing that as well. Before that Monday, though, I will be in Spokane. I'm doing a presentation that evening and doing some training sessions, I believe, in Spokane. I don't think we've worked out all the details on that, which happens to be Inauguration Day. Purposely scheduled that day, so I'll be out in Spokane doing, I believe, some activist training for either PDC, complaint, setting up local activist groups, being more effective in that, using the Public Records Act, and how to be a little bit more, how to organize your groups locally to make more of an impact. So I'm excited to see a lot of my Spokane friends and activists out there on that day. I believe, and I wrote this down, I'm not totally sure that this date's set in stone yet, but I believe I'm also that Thursday, right before Roanoke, I'm going to be out in Skagit County doing a presentation out there to the Skagit County Women's Republican Club. That's usually in the morning, at least historically it has been. So if that's still the case, I'll be out there in the morning. If they do in the evening, I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure that's the group that I'm going to be at that day. I had something on my calendar for February 4th, and sometimes I get confused between, I'm just writing out a couple of these things in advance right before we went live. So if you happen to be in these places, Redmond, Kitsap County Women's Republican Club, the Roanoke Conference coming up at the end of the month, Spokane training and presentation on the 20th, and probably Skagit County on the 23rd, that would be great. I also did some interviews yesterday. I don't know how long it'll take for us to get them posted for some school Had a chance to interview Randy Hayden and another school board member as well, just talking about some of their fights on the School Directors Association with WASDA and also with the WIAA on some of the Title IX issues regarding boys playing and girls sports. It was really good information. Great interviews. I had to kind of scramble to get some help to record it. So I'm hoping that it turns out okay. It might be it won't be the same kind of quality that we're able to get in a studio here, but hopefully I can get that content out before the week is through. And I did record a video today just about the null frame accidental release of their PowerPoint talking notes for the Washington State Senate Democrats and how they plan to try to excuse or justify all their different tax ideas that they are considering right now. And so one thing I want to get into on that, because that has been in the media a little bit, and it came out right before Christmas, the initial story on it. Just because they have a lot of different tax ideas and a lot of crazy ideas, and I'm sure there'll be a variety of virtue signaling bills that are proposed this legislative session. A lot of them are already kind of in the hopper right now. Historically, meaning over the last 30 years or so, a lot of these early filed bills don't really end up going anywhere, but they are, somebody lobbied them or wrote it for them in most cases. And so they'll propose a lot of these bills, many of which won't go anywhere. So it is worth just being aware of that. I think a lot of people will see a pre-filed bill and they'll think, well, that's definitely going to become law and what a terrible idea it is. And they are mostly terrible ideas. Certainly if it's a tax increase, it's a bad idea. But they'll propose these, and even when they know that there's actually no chance of them going anywhere. And people will say, well, how can there not be a chance? Because the Democrats have a majority in both the House and the Senate. Governor Ferguson is going to be, we're going to be forgetting about Governor Inslee. He's easily forgotten. But now you have a new governor, Governor Ferguson, who's miserable in every measurable way when it comes to pretty much any policy position that the guy has. And why would they not just shove through every one of these tax increases? Well, historically, that's just not what ends up happening. There is challenges that they're going to have legally, internally, infighting issues, distractions, all kinds of stuff that ends up happening every legislative session. It always happens this way. And so a lot of these ideas, there's ego fights, there's special interest fights, there's lobbying efforts. There's all kinds of things that are going on in the background there. And so even though the proposal that Noel Frame conveniently released had all these other different taxing ideas, probably most of those don't go anywhere. I'm not sure yet which one's actually going to be the chosen one for them to get through, if any of them, this legislative session. So we'll just have to see. Part of it, too, is that there's a general rule of thumb, of course, with government, is that no matter how much money you give them, it's never enough. They waste and squander it regardless of the amount. If you give them an extra $1 trillion, Washington State would waste it in less than a year and have nothing to show for it any more than they do right now. It's a great way to pay off a lot of political allies and grifters and grant grifting operations and all kinds of things like that. But it doesn't mean that it's actually that you're going to see any net tangible benefit to you for it. That's just how it is. And so no matter what happens, I mean, we've been able to get the benefit in Washington State of having a very strong economic circumstances here, mostly because of the high-tech boom. A lot of people living in a bubble, making a lot of money for Amazon or Microsoft or some equivalent company, especially in the greater kind of Puget Sound Basin area. And it appears that's not working as well as it has in the past. There seems to be a little bit of a downturn right now, at least as it applies to tax receipts to the state of Washington, because now they're short $10 billion supposedly over the next 4 years. And it's not that they would do any good with that $10 billion. It's a good thing they don't have it. But of course, they're desperately floundering around because $10 billion still buys you quite a few special interest groups and grant grifting operations. And there's a lot of people that feed on the trough of the gravy train coming out of Olympia. And when they can't keep exponentially increasing that amount, it starts to create basically a Hunger Games fight in Olympia between the grifters as to who gets the bigger cut of the pie approaching this in this legislative session. So inevitably, all those fights are going to go on. And so they always spell the solution in a three-letter approach. It's always TAX. So if you're a Democrat, increasing taxes is pretty much it's like in your lifeblood. It's the only policy that the party has to solve anything. It's to increase taxes, and so that's why you saw that PowerPoint where they're trying to create this agenda and talking points to justify their potential tax increases. I just don't know that any of those will go forward. One of the things to remember is they've had a surplus, billions of dollars surplus over the last, 8 years or so. I believe it was about $18 billion of surplus. And then suddenly, and that they had never budgeted for. So they were always increasing the budget every year. And they would get that money, plus they would get money that they hadn't budgeted for, which is a bonanza because you get a chance to take that money and squander it when you have the next legislative session. So it was a super great opportunity for them to, to pay off, again, special interests all over the place. And that seems like that the circus is going to be restrained a little bit moving forward. They're gonna have to have some issues that they have to deal with. And inevitably what happens is that if you do increase taxes, then businesses leave. Washington State has had a reduction in the number of businesses that have that exist here and want to renew here or arrive here. And that's a natural fallout, I think, of some of the political processes, either from a regulatory or a taxable standpoint, where they're going to basically try to come up with policies that drive businesses away or convince businesses not to come, or basically convince them to leave and locate your business somewhere else. Until recently, with the capital gains tax, Washington State was generally considered a good location for a high-tech company. And now with the imposition of the capital gains tax, you're going to not probably locate that business here anymore. You'll go somewhere else like Florida or Texas. That eventually is going to trickle into negative policy results at the tax level, and that's what Washington State's starting to experience. The Democrats are wholly incapable, of course, of really solving that problem, because for them to cut those taxes, they'd have to basically cut off some of their political allies, and they're not going to be willing to do that. But it's also still not the easiest thing in the world to get a whole new tax structure, especially some of the goofy ideas that they have that they're coming up with right now. I don't know if there's really any adults in the room on the Democrat caucus side, but there will be a lot of fighting and infighting over different, what in their mind is going to be a shrinking pie. And you got to remember, too, they're fighting against the industrial complex coming out of OSPI, the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, which is about 42% of our current budget at the state level goes into education. It's actually bigger than that because you have a lot of local levies. But what happens is Chris Reichel is another insatiable bureaucrat, and so he's head of OSPI right now, and he wants he wants another $3 billion thrown into and wasted in public education. And so to pay more and get a lot less, that's kind of the dominant approach that OSPI's had to managing the public education system over the last 20 years or so. So, and especially over the last 8 years, it's gotten substantially worse by every measurable metric. And so what they're having to do now is, of course, change the goalposts and pretend like the illiteracy increase in the public school system is not as bad as it actually is. So there's a bunch of those things that are all going together, and now we have this legislative session coming up, and Senator Noel Frame out of the 36th Leg District up in Seattle, she accidentally hits reply all and actually sends this talking points PowerPoint to all the Democrats and Republicans. So it was a good story, good video. I think I did a decent job in that video today. I'm hoping it to be launched tomorrow, and we'll see where that actually goes. But that is where we're at right now, and I'm glad to be back kind of on a semi-regular schedule to live stream. Next week, because I am doing that presentation at Eastside Republican Club on Tuesday of next week, I anticipate doing a live stream on Monday of next week. So it'll be a little different than this week. When in doubt, I'm usually doing these on Tuesdays, but just the way it's scheduled for next week with that speaking engagement, I'll be doing it probably on Monday. And I am working. I know there's a bunch of groups that have reached out to me to do both training sessions and speaking engagements that I haven't talked about already. Some of those may happen this month. Most of them I expect to really start to pick up a lot in February, March timeframe. I'm not going out that far ahead to let you know what my schedule is, but if you, as I know more about those, I'll try to talk about them in each of the future live streams that are coming up. So let's jump into some of these questions. Again, the title for this one was Back to the Robber's Roost that I started out, and I'll give you a little bit of backstory on why I use that title. When I was a kid, my grandfather, I used to ride with him sometimes, and we would drive down I-5, and I remember as we came through Lacey, or a Tumwater area, kind of you could see the Capitol there, beautiful Capitol over the trees. You could see it from the freeway. And my grandpa always said, oh, look, there's a robber's roost. And I always, when I was a little kid, I would wonder, my dad was an attorney sometimes when we go down there to the, when he would argue cases in front of the Supreme Court, a couple times when I was a kid. And I remember coming down there, and my dad would always call it the robber's roost too. And you had this memory, as a kid, you're thinking that there's a bunch of robbers there trying to get out. And then, of course, you get older and you realize that it's actually a lot worse than that. It's worse than just the robbers that I imagined as a kid that were hanging out in the state capitol. And so I'll never forget that, just thinking of it as a robber's roost, because, of course, as you learn more about Olympia and the way bureaucracy and politicians and the political class kind of work, you realize that no good things are happening generally under the dome, especially during the legislative session. And since we have a session starting up, this will be the long session. We're going to be, your freedom and your wallet, of course, are never safe when the legislature's in session. There have been times in the past when the Republicans had enough of a presence in Olympia that they could stop a lot of the crazier ideas that the Democrats would come up with. Sometimes we've had times where the roadkill caucus was there in the Senate, or the Republicans were just down by a legislative seat or so in the House, and generally that was a good thing, because that's what kind of constrains the more abusive tendencies, the default kind of tendency that the Democrat majority seems to have whenever they get control. And instead, though, right now, the Democrats have a dominant control, more similar to what it was like back in almost in 2006 or even in the 90s. We're really looking at that kind of a scenario for at least this next cycle until we have another election, at least. So we'll just see where it goes. But there's definitely, despite that, what ends up happening is dumb bills, and there are a lot more, will come up, and there will still be a couple of people. I don't know if there's anybody left in the Democrat caucus in either house that understands what math is or believes that it's real. But there may be some of them that are capable of understanding math. And if they're lobbied hard enough on a couple of those people that are in that situation, they may recognize some of the realities, or be convinced to recognize some of the realities of some of the destructive nature of some of these bills. We'll have to see. The wealth tax is particularly delusional and probably unconstitutional. The pay-per-mile tax idea with the cars, they've bounced that around for a long time. That's a horrific idea, and another bad one. They have increases, of course, in a number of these different taxes as well that they've talked about. But we will see. Let's see. Let's jump into some of these questions here, and we'll see if I can get to them. The first question here is from Frederick Neal, right here. Glenn, is there any chance Bob Ferguson will spare us from paying more taxes on just about everything? Well, I don't know. Bob Ferguson can't do much in the sense that it's not his. I mean, I'm sure he supports some of these tax ideas, but the sausage factory has to start, and so the mostly Democrats are going to be churning around on it. As a general rule, when the Republicans are in the minority like this, they're usually a little bit more unified in opposition to dumb taxes, and it tends to be one of the few things that Republicans will get unified on and say that and be in opposition to. But they're going to need a lot of Democrats to cross over to actually have an opposition vote. You got a lot of procedural opportunities that come up with amendments and other things like that that'll happen as well. But really, a lot of this is you got 9 of these different proposals. I don't know which ones are going to actually come out of the scrum. Most of them will probably die on the vine before they go anywhere serious. Usually, depending on the nature of who sponsored the bill, the Democrat that sponsored the bill, they'll want to have at least a virtue signaling hearing before the committee, even if it dies there, or they want to kick it down the road. And remember, sometimes there's a lot of deep money and special interests that are promoting some of these ideas. And there's some incentive for the Democrat legislators, really any legislator, to make it appear to be a lot more difficult than it might be to get a bill through, because that helps justify why they're going to get those campaign contribution checks from those people and from those groups. And so by not passing the bill, it gives them another reason to still keep collecting checks from that group. Once they pass the bill and it becomes law, they don't get those financial checks in as much, or at least it's a little less likely to. So it's kind of this game sometimes where they'll play, they're leading you on as though they're going to get that bill done, and they don't really get it done, and they don't really care, because it just forces whatever special interest is promoting the bill to kind of come back, dig deep again, and get started again the next time. If you've ever been involved in trying to get bills passed through the legislature, particularly ones that produce a lot of money like this, and so therefore there's some people, or potentially a lot of money to grift off of, there's a lot of insider fighting that goes on and deal making that's going on behind the scenes. And so when people feel like they're left out of it, they sabotage it, not because there's any good ideological reason why they would do that, but just purely out of spite, personal vendetta, whatever. Those are the things that tend to divide the legislature behind the scenes. And the Republicans are sort of irrelevant to this. They're not as bad as they are in California, but they definitely set themselves up for a position where they barely have the ability to be relevant with their majority, because they didn't pick up any seats in either the House or the Senate this last legislative cycle or election cycle. So they're just going to be rebuilding and trying to have a unified voice, and knowing the fact that they're Republicans, probably trying to see if there's a way that they can keep from blowing each other up for no reason. So it'll be an interesting set of circumstances that create all that. Now, the other part of this, though, to remember is that Bob Ferguson isn't trying to help you. He is going to be obsessively focused on what's going on in D.C. He's almost at the level of Newsom when it comes to Governor Newsom out of California, of his Trump derangement syndrome. He really has it. And remember, there's something very different going on in D.C. I don't generally believe that D.C. has the ability to produce anything good for Washington State. And that's generally a good bias to have. But it is always possible that between Musk, Vivek, and Trump combined, and this idea of downsizing the federal government in some significant way, if they're truly able to do that, and they actually do it, and it should reduce how much federal dollars are coming into our state. And I suspect that shifts the attention of a lot of the Democrat kind of drama and virtue signaling policy development from the state back to D.C. as they're in that type of a conflict. Part of it's going to have to do with the deportation of illegal criminals, non-U.S. citizens that are maybe voting here, whatever the issue is that's going on in our state, and whatever they're going to focus on. I think, and I tend to believe, that the Trump administration actually will focus on doing that, and we are a sanctuary state, so we're going to get quadruple the resources focused on us that you'll see in some of these other states that are going to be cooperating with Homeland Security a little bit more, and ICE and all this stuff in the deportation effort, since our state is a sanctuary state, foolishly. And there'll be some fight. You got a number of different sheriffs in the state that are going to cooperate with ICE. That'll create some drama. There'll be a lot of distraction. How dare we, deport violent criminals or sex offenders that Bob Ferguson likes so much. So somewhere along the way, these guys are going to, that type of drama that goes on is likely to create a ripple effect into whatever's happening in the legislative side of things. And depending on the distraction level of all these federal issues that could have an impact on our state, that's going to have an impact on what gets out of the legislature. Usually, any given legislative session, I haven't looked at the pre-filed bill lists yet, or comprehensively right now, but usually you'll get about 3,000 bills that are proposed each legislative session, give or take. Sometimes more, sometimes less. Of those, at the most, you're going to get maybe 500 of them end up on the governor's desk to be signed. most of the bills that get through are generally pretty minor, small ball kind of things. They're usually, just little things that don't mean much. Usually they're tweaks, they're lower levels of controversy, bills that don't have a lot of amendments tossed onto them, bills that have been through the ringer a number of times in the past. Just a lot of little, most of it. And then you'll have about maybe 40 bills, 30 bills the most, which could cause great harm and destruction, no doubt. But the real focus probably should be on those 30 bills if you can figure out which ones they're going to be. And I've been through this so many times in Olympia, and I've watched activists squander vast sums of time and energy on bills that aren't going anywhere, and everybody knows it. But they're virtue signaling bills by the usually Democrat or socialist that's proposed that bill, not because they think it's going to go anywhere, but just simply because it's going to help them with their fundraising here during the next election cycle in 2026. So they know it's not going to go anywhere. They don't care. They just propose it. They love the fact that a bunch of conservatives are all up in arms about them, and the bill doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't get out of committee, or it never gets out. It never gets to the Ways and Means Committee. Whatever it is, it dies before it goes anywhere. So it is worthwhile to focus on the bills that seem like they're getting some traction. And I don't know that we're going to know that for sure, which bills those are, for a couple more weeks. What I might try to do is see if I can do I don't know if I can get a legislator to come into the studio and do an interview, or if I have to go out in the field to do one. But I do want to try to interview at least one of the legislators who might be a little bit more experienced on this and explain from their perspective how that looks, because having just seen this now going all the way back to 2011, which is when I first really started paying attention to the legislature. I think that was the first year I testified on a bill up in the legislature. So what happens is, having seen this a lot over the years now, you can waste a lot of energy and time on a lot of things, but narrowing in on just a couple of key really destructive bills, or the bills that look like they're getting some traction, that's the best way to kind of move ahead on this. Good question, Frederick. Thank you for asking that. Next question right here, Jim Hill. I believe that Inslee promised no state income tax, and you are right, he did. It was a lie, but that's Inslee, and he did promise that. I never heard that from Ferguson. Nothing really promised by Ferguson, and we know that misery lies ahead. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, right? The challenge that you have with Ferguson is that, he has zero attachment to the truth, and I mean, Inslee wasn't an honest guy either. But Ferguson also doesn't have the DC background and arrogance that Inslee had, and Ferguson's probably a little bit more intelligent than Inslee. Ferguson may be more thin-skinned. He may be more vindictive. He may be a nastier guy. He may like violent sex predators more than Inslee does. But generally, Ferguson didn't feel like he had to make promises to anybody except for his leftist friends. You had that. There's a photo I used a couple times of people who've taken photos of Ferguson when he was meeting with Nick Hanauer at a coffee shop up in Seattle in public, and they could see a photo of them meeting and conniving and planning ahead. But generally, we'll just have to see what ends up happening there. But I don't think that. State income tax isn't so much the issue here as all these other random taxes that you saw in Noel Frame's little propaganda game. And I'm not sure, now that went public, I don't know if they'll be coming back. I mean, even for them, I mean, mostly the propaganda talking points that PowerPoint presentation had, it was about things like, taxes are not punishment. Which is funny that they say that, but of course they're punishing. But nevertheless, that's how the Democrats want to sell it. They want to say that, pretend like it's not punishment. And so it was just great, create a villain, and identify that villain, and that's who we're going to say that we're punishing with this tax. But it's not punishment. It's we're making investments, and if they're making investments, they're just simply wanting to invest in their future campaign contributions or activists, the groups that actually go out and get them the votes that they need to get elected. So anyway, that's kind of the drama that you see going on there. But, it won't be because Ferguson's a good guy that something doesn't happen. It's just going to be, I think it's because there's going to be a lot of distractions going on and infighting now. Remember, the one thing that happens is that once the Democrats get a majority, they have to fight amongst themselves over who's going to get which cut of the pie. And there isn't enough money to go around. And so the infighting is going to be the big thing that occurs here. If the Republicans know how to utilize that strategically, most of them won't, but a few of them might. And so when they know how to, they can jump in and kind of kill some of these things early on. It does happen sometimes. Here's a question right now. Rod Stewart, you're asking, is it time for the fourth box in Olympia as the other three haven't worked? Ray, don't know, because I don't know exactly what you're talking about, but anything that works to make a difference here, we'll have to see, and we'll just see where it goes. Let's see. DC's Bees. Yep, welcome to 2025. Washington State's going to be an interesting show. It will be. Jason Fisher, back. Good to hear from you. Happy New Year. Merry Christmas to you as well. A little late on that now, but still always worth sending out a Merry Christmas welcome, even if we are a couple weeks past that time. What are the chances of a congestion tax like in New York City? Very low, and I'll tell you why. In order for a congestion tax to work, you have to have a substantially controlled area that can basically pull up their license plate readers usually that can pull up information so they know who to tax, and that's a very difficult. That's a very difficult technical thing to achieve, and I don't know that. I mean, Seattle would be the only logical place for this. And Seattle does a lot of stupid things. I mean, this is a dumb idea that I'm sure that Seattle would like to imitate from New York City. But, the question you always have is how self-destructive is a local jurisdiction actually willing to be? New York City sometimes impresses me with its willingness to dive down into the bowels of self-destruction. I lived there for 4 years as a student, so I do remember what real crime used to be like. It isn't like what it is now. It was a lot worse back then in every measurable statistical way. So please go back and look at if you think I'm making this up, just go back and look at the FBI crime stats. As I've mentioned before many times, I mean, my sophomore year, 2,200 people were murdered within 10 miles of my dorm room, and it wasn't even considered that big of a deal. The next year it went down by a little bit, but those 2 years, my sophomore and junior year, more people were murdered those 2 years than the last 10, 15 years, I think, of New York City murder rates combined. I had to go back and look at that, but I mean, it was terrible, far worse than it is now. Still bad, and the crime is clearly on the upsurge. And I love the fact that, and of all things, they keep coming out and say, "Oh, don't worry, crime's not that bad," and then someone gets burned alive on the subway, and then they get pushed in front of a subway car. And now those things I don't remember anybody ever getting burned alive, but I do remember people getting pushed in front of subways. That used to happen. This was in the late '80s, early '90s. It did happen periodically. The difference is now everything's on video, and so you're able to get that information spread out a little bit wider than you used to be able to back then. Also, I do believe that that they try to deceive the public on crime stats, and if you have a city run by the left, and the crime is getting bad, which it does almost by default if Democrats run a city, then as the crime gets worse, they start to find ways of trying to massage or modify or downplay those crime stats. They always do this. Now, that's been going on for decades. Nothing unusual about that now. In fact, even if you saw those old, if you ever watched The Wire, from 20 years ago, Baltimore trying to massage their crime stats to make it seem like it's not so bad for an election cycle coming up. That's the kind of thing that they do, and they do it all over the place. And we're seeing a lot more of that now. And the FBI has been caught up in this lately because the crime stats that they published were substantially misleading because they had purposely left out a lot of these leftist sort of cities that simply didn't provide crime stats at all to the FBI, and so therefore these national crime statistics are not real. And we're seeing something similar happen, and at a national level, and you're going to see some of it locally. Seattle's most likely the one going to be the worst on it, but There's allegations that Federal Way is falsifying crime stats. The people who are saying that are basing it based on the 911 calls and the police reports, which is a fairly exhaustive process to go through, and then comparing to how those track with the officially published crime stats for those cases. And that was a very painstaking work. A couple people have been doing that in Federal Way. And some of that, there seems to be some merit to that. You also see in Spokane, especially because you've got Lisa Brown there, the mayor out there, who's horrific in every measurable way. She'll be putting a lot of pressure to make it seem like her crazy, especially the homeless industrial complex sort of policies that are absolutely introducing and inviting in the drug cartels and other violent activity in the city. She'll be trying to pretend like it's not as bad as it really is. So she'll put a lot of pressure on the police chief out there to falsify those crime stats. So that's what it is. And this ultimately, of course, leads to the inevitable. What will they, Renee Coppola, this is, of course, a classic Thatcher sort of story about what will they do when they run out of aspects of our lives to regulate and run out of other people's money. And this is really, comes back to a Margaret Thatcher quote back in the 80s. The problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money. And it's true. You know, one of the weird's the wrong term. One of the odd things right now, I think, with what we're facing in our country in general, and it's certainly better to have Trump in D.C. Than Kamala Crazy Harris, and so we probably dodged a really significant nightmare by putting Trump back there, of course. But nevertheless, Trump's faced with a pretty unusual set of challenges, even with the help of Musk and Vivek and anybody else there trying to solve some of these problems. The theory of cutting $2 trillion a year out of the federal budget is a great aspiration, but there's a lot of work that has to go into that, and you're stepping on a lot of toes. Even in D.C., $2 trillion buys you a lot of allies and influence, and cutting it is going to be not as simple as I think people want it to be. I would like to see them cut it even more, but if they're able to cut that, that's tremendous significance. But the bigger problem is you have this massive, we all know it's unsustainable in the deficit, but especially you look back, since 2008, we've printed 50% of all US dollars in existence since the beginning of the country. That massive influx, that's why you have some inflation, that's why you're having some of these other issues. Somehow you have to deal with that. And the numbers are so big and the momentum is so strong that reversing and changing that is very difficult, even in a 4-year, even an 8-year, even in a 12-year window. Let's just say you're able to get a follow-on president to continue this process. It's maybe possible to do it, but man, you have to take seriously hard and aggressive steps right now, and all those steps are going to appear to be reducing, especially because you use government employment and GDP statistics. So if you actually cut back on all of the government spending, or even that much of the government spending, there's a substantial impact on GDP, which is going to ripple. Even though that's good, you're taking out unproductive activity, and I've always disagreed with integrating government stats into the GDP data because I think it's misleading. But nevertheless, because that is how we've been using it, once you take that government spending away and GDP drops down, it's positive drop, but it'll still look like a real negative contraction in the economy overall, and it will create issues. So that's going to create problems, and we're going to be faced with some genuine challenges there. Now, one of the benefits of that, all that drama going on in D.C., is that it's going to keep blowing back into Washington State. And we're one of the states with California, probably Oregon, Michigan, Illinois, a couple states like that, maybe Colorado, where the governors in these states are going to position themselves to fight Trump more than almost anything else. Maybe New York. Again, I know there's some other states, and not just the ones I mentioned, but I live in Washington, so I care about what's going on in Washington. And so if our governor decides that his primary mission in life, and he's practically defined himself this way, is to fight Trump, then that tends to orient a lot of government policy that way. Trump tends to push back a little bit, And the teams that he's putting in, I think, are capable of pushing back in some ways. And so if they're able to do that significantly enough, the drama of this fighting back and forth is probably going to impact Washington State in some way. Maybe it's more than people realize. I don't know. But as that impacts us here, you're just going to see all kinds of ripple effect in the budget-making process in our state, especially if grants start drying up. Federal grant money tends to get filtered through state and county funds in a lot of cases, and so when this money goes away, it gets pulled back, and it's not coming back, then there'll be the musical chair problem. As those chairs disappear, there'll be a lot of fighting between groups because they want to be the ones still to get the money or sit on the chair, and some people are going to be losers. So you're more likely to get whistleblowers coming out of that. I mean, there's all kinds. This really tends to create this interesting ripple effect. And you'd rather be in a state that doesn't have such corrupt politicians in it, but that's not the state we live in. We have horrifically corrupt politicians that have not or very little redeeming value to them, and so they're very likely to be caught up in this drama in a much more aggressive and significant way. Sorry, I need to go back and catch up to some of these questions here. This is, interestingly enough, the Vivek Musk sort of approach, the way they've broken down this kind of Department of Government Efficiency, which I think is a terrible name. But nevertheless, Doge, that's going to be your structure for how you're going to be downsizing or addressing the downsizing of the state. The biggest benefit that's unmeasurable initially is this cutting back of regulation. Trump actually generally was able to do some of that quite well in his first 4 years in office. If you go back and you look at the Reagan administration, it was one of the things that they tried to run on too. And if you read Sagebrush Rebel, some of the other articles about their effort to come in and downsize, and then many times they failed at the time, I think the difference between that and now is that there's a much greater recognition about the kind of ingrained nature of the corruption and the special interests that control the administration. And just, I think there's so much of this that goes on right now. And I suspect that you're going to have a lot of new people coming into government that don't care about stepping on old toes. And if Trump's truly able to address those issues and downsize the regulatory side of things a lot, that could have big, big impacts in a positive way in our country. I don't know what to think about the tariff approach. I mean, tariffs are generally not a good idea, but you could convince me that there's a way to strategically use some of these tariffs in restoring some of the manufacturing capabilities in America and possibly protecting or helping regrow some of these capabilities in our country. We'll see, because I've heard that before, and I haven't necessarily seen it demonstrated. So if we're able to demonstrate that now, it'd be great. Long-term application of significant tariffs generally aren't good. It does increase the cost of living. If they're used in a specific way, maybe a transactional sort of way, which seems to be Donald Trump's kind of profile, perhaps you're able to make quite a bit of a difference and quite a bit of an impact. Let's see. I'm going to go to this one because this is a funny one. Yeah, Rob Pogue, background checks and ammunition. Yeah, an absolutely stupid idea, and one that'll, of course, be challenged, and we'll see what happens. I can't tell if there was somebody you might have had a question up here above this. Let me see if I can get to that. Oh, there we go, maybe. There was another question about a terrible idea, terrible bill idea. It's come up before. This is not the first time this dumb idea has been here. I don't know if they would really do that or not, but we'll have to see. Again, it's a bad idea. Eniat Mule, do you foresee any of the new or reintroduced gun bills reaching Ferguson's desk? And if so, will they be challenged constitutionally? Thank you. It kind of depends. Ferguson would sign any dumb idea that lands on his desk having to do with gun control. One of the things, though, to remember is that there's some incentive for the Democrats, and I know this, people may not realize this, but there's some incentive for them to fail in the effort to get some of those bills up there. And the reason is, if they pass a bunch all the George Soros's dream selection of anti-gun efforts, then they no longer have the ability to justify a lot of the money that would be otherwise flowing into their accounts from these groups that they promised to get it through, and they just keep failing because they just keep failing, right? And so for many years, a lot of the anti-gun money kept flowing into these Democrat coffers, and they weren't getting anything done. And that was funny to me because they really didn't have any intention, I think, to pass some of those bills at the time. They just wanted to keep collecting the money. They had proposed the bill wouldn't really go anywhere, and then they get a chance to do it. And every time they do this, they get max donations from all these anti-gunners around the country. Now, they're also having a lot of these things shot down at the federal level, where the courts will challenge them and throw them out because they're unconstitutional. And so how much longer can you just keep operating on this? Now, again, the lefties' priority does tend to be making sure that they take as much of your money as they can take, that they hurt you as much as they possibly can on property rights, and that they increase crime, make you less safe, so that hopefully it inspires you to spend more money on government, and they remove the ability of you to protect yourself. That does seem to be a common theme with Democrats, leftists in particular, all around the country. So we'll see. There's some crazy ideas that were proposed this time that seem so obviously unconstitutional that I'm not sure they're going to go anywhere with it. But and especially now when the change in DC is going to have an impact in our state. I just can't tell exactly what it's going to be. I think it's for the positive. That won't be how the Democrats view it, but I think it's going to be for the positive. And as they, there's some different policies that they could implement back in DC, I think that would help us a lot here. One of them, I'll just give you an example. It's a minor one. This is actually an executive order one that could be done. And it simply is to make it public all of the legal non-U.S. citizens living in our state. So the ones under, green cards, H-1B visas, F-1 visas, all these other visa here. So they're here legally. Just because you make the list doesn't mean that they're going to be, you aren't getting deported because you're here under a legal visa. It might be a temporary visa, but you're still here under a legal visa. And the value to us in Washington State in having that published, and it wouldn't be just our state, it would actually benefit quite a few of them, would be to look and see how many of these people are registered to vote in our state. Doesn't mean they do vote, but how many of them are registered to vote? And the answer is going to be almost all of them, because we have a horrific voter roll process in our state that's corrupted from top to bottom. And so the voter rolls are completely inaccurate. Anybody that says that they are accurate is lying. But lying is what comes with the territory, because what they've tried to do is make it almost impossible to clean up the voter rolls. But it would be the Homeland Security controls that list. When we had first tried to get that list under the first Trump administration, they would refuse to release it under Freedom Records, Freedom requests. We had a Freedom of Information request back then. However, now I think they're recognizing that if they could publicize that list, just make it public, they don't have to do anything more than that, then we can run those comparison lists against the voter rolls, and we'll see that they're all registered to vote. Now, I don't know how many of them have voted, but the very fact that they are registered to vote is an indicative, indicates what we've been saying all along, that's irrefutable, that the voter rolls in Washington State are not accurate or remotely good. Again, this goes back to some of the federal reforms in the election process. Just having that as evidence to justify some of the federal election reforms that we have to have in order to correct some of the problems that we see, it would be a good step in that direction. And that's something that Trump could actually do. He could do that right now because the Homeland Security has that list. It's just sitting there, and they just don't release it to the public. And again, there's no legal consequences specifically for the people who they're not going to necessarily be deported. Now, the ones who voted, they might be in trouble in some way, but they wouldn't be able to get U.S. citizenship very easily if that's the path that they were hoping to be on, at least under the current law. But that's something they could do right away. That would be an impact. That ripples into Washington State in a very different way. The challenge that we're going to have on federal election reform is going to be the Republicans from red states, because most of them are lazy and asleep at the switch and unaware of the significance of some of the federal election reforms that need to go on, right? They got elected. Somehow they got elected into this process. They don't think it's happening in their state, where they're wrong, but they don't think it is, and they get elected anyway, and so they don't have incentive. And there's no real lobbying effort to fix some of the election problems. And I've already done a video on this, the 6 issues, but they're fairly simple, right? Require identification and citizenship, proof of citizenship when you register to vote, renew your voter registration every 4 years, in-person voting, no more mail-in voting, same-day counting, so that the results are known on election night, not 4 weeks later when you found every secret stash of ballots in the election worker's truck that you could hide, and no machine counting, which doesn't really change things here in the state. When I say machine voting, I mean the touch screens where there's no audit trail on exactly what happens there. In Washington State, we do have ballots, so there is a paper trail here. But even if they just did those changes, I think there'd be a fairly dramatic difference in Washington State in just cleaning up a lot of crufty voter rolls that have hundreds of thousands of people that don't exist on them right now. And that would actually help us a lot in the state, more than people realize. And it would make it a much more consistent voting system here, similar to other states. And until the last few years, the way that most of the world voted, which was they would know the elections right away instead of dragging it out for a month. Only Democrats don't like that idea, but it's certainly worth doing. Ken Proctor, I do not know what you mean when you say 4th box. Be a little more specific here. And so, we'll see. This is Scott Keith. Thank you. Listen, Thurston County has a lot of problems. And we probably have, of the 5 county commissioners, got a new one taking office who's terrible and will probably prove to be just as clownish as some of the others. And you've got 2 really bad ones in there now, and another one that I don't think is so great. I do think that we're going to be scrounging around through a series of incompetent outcomes for a while in Thurston County. But the money at a county level tends to dry up more, especially if you've stolen a lot of money, like the whole missing funds with the new building, right? And the $300,000 hit right here is just the beginning of money that vanished. I mean, Thurston County's not been good with their money. They never have been, but they got a lot worse. And I think they do have a good county manager right now. He's going to be trying to get to the bottom of some of this stuff, but he's also put in a really tough spot where they're trying to resolve some of this drama. And, you can't just keep having the money stolen and disappear like that. So we will have to see what happens, but it's going to be pretty interesting. Let's see. Brian Smith, thank you for reminding me on this one. Next, the Domestic Violent Extremism Task Force is Friday, January 10th at 9 a.m. And anybody can Zoom into those meetings. I don't know that anything's happened in those meetings. The last one that happened, I wasn't able to check in, but I sent a number of people who did, and I didn't really get any feedback on the significance of whatever it was that they saw. So I guess the snitch line's up right now, so I'm curious. I don't know why, to my knowledge, nobody's reported me yet, but I'm sure they will be. I just haven't seen that come in yet. There were some good bills that have been proposed lately. I see a couple people mentioning that here. Not a question, so I won't get to that. But when there will be some good bills proposed. To some extent, the Republicans who do propose these good bills, they know that mostly good bills aren't going to get hearings, right? The Democrats are going to not let those bills ever get a public hearing if they can avoid it. Sometimes they'll do some horse trading where they might allow a public hearing on it, but then they won't let it go any further than that. So the Republicans are going to be living in this sort of world where they aren't going to be able to get much of their agenda through at all without compromising and selling their souls. So I'd rather them not get anything through than sell their souls to get something through, because that usually means that you sold your soul to get some terrible, pathetic little achievement that you can pretend like you had when you go run for office in a couple years, rather than to hold the line and stop some of the craziness that the Democrats otherwise have. So having a unified opposition against the worst of the bad ideas is important. And most of the Republican legislators right now will probably take that approach, but some of them can be bought off. And so, hopefully we don't see too much of that going on this next legislative cycle. This is funny. I'm going to jump into this even though it's not a question, but can't wait till Tom Holman visits us. Yeah, that'll be interesting. And, Holman is head of the Border Czar, and he's been, of course, making a lot of media rounds on how he's going to focus on a lot of the places like Washington State that have these stupid sanctuary city laws. And, we're going to have to see how well, listen, the deporting all these bad people is a good idea. It's absurd that we have to do it. It's essentially cleaning up the mess after it's been created. But by starting to do that approach, I'm fairly optimistic that they'll be reducing the greater drama that comes into our, it comes into our country. One of the things that I think that'll start to do is you will reduce crime by basically deporting a lot of violent criminals that have come here illegally over the last few years, especially the biggest volume of undetected immigrants, for lack of a better term, and they're just illegal aliens coming in here, but the undetected criminals, over 1 million, I believe, right now, that are straight out violent criminals wanted for violent crimes, getting rid of those people will improve the country quite a bit. And I think that as you get rid of some of this, I think that some of that, it'll improve life quite a bit. The other thing that does help us a lot is these federal regulations. If they really get removed quite a bit faster, then it'll make a bigger distinction between some of the states. Like Washington State has a lot of terrible laws, but it will bring back some economic resurgence in some ways. And we'll just have to see how that goes. But I think that the deportation thing, if they really stick to their guns on that and genuinely do what they say they're going to do, that starts to pay dividends pretty quickly. And to some extent, too, the work site raids that they're talking about doing, and Holman specifically has promised that, if he really does those, then you're going to see a lot more job opportunities coming out there for people to come in and work in the, especially construction industries, and maybe agriculture a little bit, that have been artificially deflated on the payroll side of things. But in an economic downturn, which I think we're probably facing no matter what, it'll give people an opportunity to get more jobs. So we'll see. Let's see. Miss Mindersuit right here. We used to live off tariffs until they changed it. No more high taxes with tariffs. Yeah, I mean, that's the other argument, right? And that's true until 1860s, I believe, when the first income tax was implemented. It went away for a while, but during the Civil War, there was equivalent of an income tax that Abraham Lincoln brought into effect. And then they got rid of it. They did go back to generally the country was bringing in money. It wasn't just off tariffs, especially after 1864 when they did the Homestead Act. There were other ways that they were bringing in money from a lot of different sources at the time, but tariffs were the dominant source of revenue for America. It would be interesting to see. I don't even know if it's possible to go to that level. I mean, the downsizing would be much more significant. Where we really run into problems financially, it's not the military as much as my lefty friends want to say that that's it. I mean, there's a huge problem with a lot of bloated waste in the military-industrial complex. There is. But it's not the military as much as it is the bigger expenditures associated with things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and these other just forever programs that absorb massive amounts of money. And it's questionable long-term how they're going to benefit the country. So and reform is going to be inevitable there. I don't care what people say. You will eventually, either it goes away entirely because everything blows up, or you eventually have to have some kind of reform. What's crazy is that at the federal level, just to see these discussions about like Greenland, Trump's, I mean, I can't totally tell if he's trolling for some of this stuff, or if there's some kind of an event there that he's actually working towards with Greenland, for example. And of course, everybody likes to joke about annexing Canada. The funny thing is, I was up in Victoria a couple years before COVID. I went up there with the kids. A friend of mine had a sailboat. We sailed up to Victoria. It was fun. We stayed on the sailboat. You could stay right downtown, and then we went around a couple of these different museums. And there was a museum in Victoria where I remember reading about. I don't know what year it was. It was like early 1900s. That there was some politicians up there that they were trying to get British Columbia to become part of America. And I think that this has actually come up periodically over the years where some of the western provinces of Canada have, because culturally they're a lot more aligned with America than you would have with Quebec, for example. Quebec would be quite a bit different than Saskatchewan or Alberta or some of these, and even British Columbia, than those areas are with America. And there's massive natural resources up in Canada, and it'd be interesting. I think that's always been a little unlikely, but the provinces and the governmental structure of Canada, I've been under the impression that there was a little bit more flexibility potentially for some of those provinces to go a little bit more rogue than the way you would see states potentially go rogue in America. So it would be fascinating if somehow, with all this craziness going on, that if you actually had some of those Western provinces join with America, it would be amazing, because you would have and Greenland of all places. If that actually did happen, the natural resource capacity with rare earth minerals, with oil exploration, with nickel mining, with copper mining, just a lot of these other, even just timber potential, you would have a really unusual increase in potential natural resources that America would have. I worked in Canada for a year, well, on again, off again, for a year when I did a startup company back in the late 90s, and had a lot of friends up there at the time. And, one of the things is most Americans don't pay any attention to Canada, actually. We don't really think of it much, but they obsess a lot about America because obviously we're the big country next door. Canada is our biggest trading partner, and so Canada is actually an important part of our import-export sort of business in our country. But because they speak English nominally and the French sections of Canada, and there's other challenges that Canada has that would not be as fun to integrate, but there's still a lot of common ground, and you can drive across the border into Canada and tour around up there, as I've done before. Haven't done it in years, but I used to do it a lot more when I was younger. And you get I love Canadians, meet them out driving sometimes in northern British Columbia or over in Saskatchewan or some other places like that. You can really get a chance to see a lot of culturally similar sort of areas. And so it's kind of funny just to that this has come up recently. That in the Panama Canal, we're living in weird times where these issues are going to come up all the time, but we'll see what happens. Let's see. Jason, in private, how much kissing with Sideshow Bob will he do to Trump? We all know that it's an act, and on private that these guys are all cool with Trump. Jason, that's a good question. And I do think there's a lot of posturing in public that could be different than how it is behind the scenes. I don't think that's the case with Ferguson so much. Ferguson kind of has used Trump as a crutch for his very political existence. It was one of the ways that Ferguson defined himself as the Attorney General. Remember, he was only in office for 4 years. Ferguson was only in office 4 years when Trump got elected. And so it suddenly gave him an opportunity to justify his existence and pretend like he was a relevant AG. Nationally, if you have higher aspirations than Washington State governor, it means, like Inslee, you're going to be looking for running for president. Now, I know Ferguson has no chance of ever becoming president or a serious candidate for presidency. I think he has a lot more baggage even than Inslee did, and Inslee couldn't even get out of 1%. But the thing to remember is that Washington State is viewed as very much a backwater state in America. We're not the center of the universe, as much as it might feel like it to those of us who live here. And so because we're not an important state politically in this country, for a couple of reasons, but geographic distance is part of it. We're basically a place for both parties to stop and fundraise in, but it doesn't matter too much to them. Otherwise, if we were a battleground state, it'd be a little different. But because we aren't, we just don't get the same kind of attention from either party. So, ego and delusions and all this delusions of grandeur that happen. Somebody like Ferguson, once he's in there as governor, he may be having this higher aspiration to run for president. Every governor probably does at one point in time or another. I do think he's actually genuinely hostile to Trump. If he's not, he certainly made himself hostile to Trump with all the pointless litigation. Even though a lot of it failed, I think Ferguson's very comfortable in lying about pretending like he's a great legal mind when he's actually lost a lot of cases. He's very good at beating up on poor people, low-income people, and Ferguson's really effective at destroying the lives of people that don't have a lot of money. But when faced with significant opposition, that's usually when Ferguson runs into problems. I don't know what it's going to be like for him as governor coming in, because there's a lot of Democrats that don't like him, and I don't know how much undermining is going to be occurring there. But I don't know. I think that there's some real animosity between Trump and Bob Ferguson. I don't think they get along. So maybe Ferguson be willing to sell his soul, sell his lefty soul to compromise with Trump in some way. I don't know what he would be selling for that, but we'll just have to see. I'd be surprised. I don't think in this case, I don't think it's an act. I've never heard that it's an act with him. Other things might be an act, but I've never heard that this is one of them. So I genuinely think that at this point in time, they're both opposed. The one thing to remember, too, is that Ferguson exists in the shadow of Newsom, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California. And Newsom's really positioned himself as the front runner of most of the Democrat governors. Maybe he has, within their world, he may be competing a little bit with the governor from Michigan, Whitmer, or the governor from New York, maybe. But generally, Newsom is clearly like the primary leader of the resistance to Trump. And Newsom has leveraged that relationship to turn Oregon and Washington State, to some extent Colorado, into like these little fiefdoms where those are mini-me's of Newsom. Newsom will take point on some stupid idea, and then those little governors are like, and Ferguson, Inslee did it before him, but Ferguson seems to be following in the footsteps of he'll probably be in the shadow of Newsom, and I don't know if that's going to change much, but we will see. Let's see, I was railroaded by the city of Camas, Washington in 2011. When I began my political ambitions, I could not find an attorney in the whole United States to help me, still sharing my testimony. Well, you have to be clear. I don't know what happened back then, but let me know. This is okay, Jason, before I get to yours, this is funny. Yeah, this is another thing. How about the Gulf of America instead of the Gulf of Mexico? I don't know. Again, I can't tell in these things, honestly. I mean, I laugh, and it is funny. Calling Canada a state, saying you're going to take back the Panama Canal, you're going to buy Greenland, and it should be the Gulf of America, not Mexico. That Trump's bringing all this stuff up. A lot of this it creates you're almost baiting the other side to get so distracted with all this drama that they're almost incapable of doing what they want. And listen, if that's what Trump's doing, I love it. If he really wants to change it, that's even better, because there's a level of seriousness behind it, but we'll have to find out. Anyway, I just thought that. Thank you for mentioning that one again. I forgot about that. That's so funny. Jason, back to your question here. What's your thoughts on Seattle firing the officer who hit that woman? Seems to me he has a case against the city. They didn't say what he did was illegal, but they don't like publicity. Yeah, that's a good question. And Jason, I have to tell you, I saw that, and I don't know enough about the details behind the police officer striking that woman. I do want to look into that a little bit more, because Seattle has had a history of firing police officers at times that it wasn't really justified, and they're currently, I think, losing a couple of cases right now for unjustified firings. However, it is true that it's not just for Seattle, but it's probably for any law enforcement office, if you end up hitting a pedestrian or getting into a car accident without a lot of really good reasons for why you were in that situation, then you're going to probably get in trouble, and being fired wouldn't surprise me in those cases. But I don't really know all the details on this one, so I don't really want to weigh in on this without knowing a little bit more about it with what's going on. Miss Mindersue, back at you with questions, censorship questions. and I'm not sure U.S. crew, but probably the censorship question. So there was a big deal with that whole budget battle in D.C. where the was a State Department was running essentially the central distribution center for censorship, and the short-term proposed budget, these omnibus budget bills, still funded that, which was crazy. And so that was part of the big opposition that occurred last November, right, late November, going into December, about forgetting, we're not going to fund that kind of thing, December timeframe. So it got defunded. However, if you've been paying attention to the news lately, everybody's indicated that what they've done is, sure, that got defunded, but those people that they funded have simply just changed the job title and moved to some other part of the deep state. So, and the blob, whatever they are. And so they're going to have to go through and just fire everybody that's involved in this censorship effort. It's a bad thing, but I don't see it going away easily. Obviously, the pale imitations of that have been created, like what Bob Ferguson's doing in our state. There's nothing the left demands more than censorship, because they can't. Their agenda's so bad that if there's any real practical opposition to it, that it has the potential to fall apart on its own. The thing about censorship that's interesting, I've been reading up again a little bit more on the French Revolution time period, and there was a lot of censorship by the Jacobians, right, once they took over. Censoring their opposition when they weren't cutting off their heads was actually a fairly high priority for them. And there was opposition in France going on all the time in a big chaotic sort of way. And the censorship has always been there with any kind of left-leaning movements. In particular, like, they're more sensitive to that than almost anything else. And the censorship, you saw it when the Soviet Union, you saw it in Eastern Europe after the Cold War, or during the Cold War, but in the Eastern Europe bloc countries. You saw it in China. You still see it in China today. The prioritization that they have of censorship is so high that they will almost do anything. They will give away anything to retain the ability to censor, which really highlights the fact that I've been arguing for a long time now, going back till at least 2011, about basically finding ways to ensure that you distribute information to the public around you and to everybody around you that's going on with government, the stuff they don't want you to know about. Censorship is a high priority for them, because they know if you know the truth and you find out what's actually going on in government, you're going to probably want to change how that government's operating. And that's a great fear of those in charge. They really want to conceal and manipulate the public perception about how bad a job they're doing in government. That's why you see the Washington State Democrat Party with their Senate Democrats talking points, the PowerPoint proposal that Senator Frame, accidentally sent to all the Republicans. You see it's just this obsession with their talking points and manipulating the media. Well, you don't need to spend a lot of time manipulating the Seattle Times or King 5 News or any of the other kind of the pretend mainstream media sources anymore, because they've already sold their soul long ago. So what they're going to probably do is the Seattle Times already wants to cooperate with the censorship industrial complex. So does King 5 News. So do a bunch of these the traditional media places, Spokesman Review, probably all those guys. They're willing to go along with it. Now, part of it's because it ideologically aligns with them, but also they don't have, their budgets are going down, they're struggling. And so sometimes it's just easier to take and regurgitate the talking points that are handed to you by the government entities, like these talking points that we saw in that PowerPoint presentation. So even if they aren't totally corrupted, they're just willing to go along with it because it's easy. But mostly ideologically, they're just they're all in the same pot. They're boiling together, and they really don't like it if you're actually trying to expose the truth on what's going on out there. So they'll do whatever they can to undermine their potential competition. I just don't know that that's a winning formula anymore in this country, because it has obviously produced, based on surveys and subscription levels and everything else, this collapse in credibility with all the mainstream media. It's on the steep descent right now, and I don't see it letting up. And they don't seem, I mean, there's a general recognition that it's happening, but I don't even see the people that are in charge of these operations being willing to lose their religion and suddenly rediscover journalism again. So as they kind of crash and burn, obviously that's why you're seeing this alternative media popping up everywhere. And I'm not, they can keep trying to run down the censorship rabbit hole. And obviously they're hoping to use AI to do this. They're trying to come up with all these different tools. But it could be that we've at least kicked that bucket down the road a few years, and hopefully forever, but I'll take even a few years from now, so that there can be an alternative media sort of program or ecosystem built that can push back. And that needs to be done at the local level as well as at the federal level. There's plenty of people that are aware of it at the federal level and building bigger operations to do that. But I think at the local level it's still weak, and that's why you see the dangers of what Ferguson is doing and promoting his censorship regime, what they call the violent extremist research project, whatever he wants to call it. But we'll see what happens with that. Jack, I'm going to jump into this one for you. What happened to the drones? Fogvid? I'm not sure what you're saying there. Good question on the drones, and that's a weird thing. I mean, I don't have an answer for that. I've never seen these drones myself, so I see the videos just like everybody else has. I think there's some truth when they say that people aren't always aware of what they see, but there's other things that clearly look like there's some issue there. So we'll see what happens. And then Jason, this is a good question, and I'll kind of respond to some of this just cumulatively here. But how aggressive do you think they're going to push these anti-gun bills this year? Colorado's pushing a bill to ban all semi-automatic rifles with detachable mags. We'll see that here. Yeah, the same thing will probably be proposed here. I don't know. We'll just have to see. At a certain point in time, what happens is it really depends on the drama threshold and what else is going on. We are in a strange time. Listen, it's easy if you to celebrate and say that Trump got elected and be happy about that. I'm happy about it. Hopefully you are too. But I also don't believe that I don't put a lot of faith in politicians generally. I certainly don't have a cult of personality associated with anyone. But I'm positive him being in office is way, way better than the horrific alternative. Now the question becomes, how do you deal with these really significant problems that have been created through the last 50 years of malinvestment and bad behavior by our elected officials? At a national level, right, you're going to be facing a couple of things. Can we avoid going to major war moving forward? Avoiding pointless and ridiculous and destructive and harmful conflict is and should be a high priority. Trump says it is, but he's also trying to negotiate from a position of strength, which is wise. But there'll be a really dangerous window of time here where some countries may decide that it's safer for them to have a big war for different reasons. China comes to mind just because of their own internal problems that they have, and the fact that unfree countries oftentimes will trigger wars to distract from their own incompetence or bad behavior on their own side. So that, staying out of a war is a big thing. That's number one. Number two, are they going to try to come up with some kind of a massive disease again that gets accidentally or willfully unleashed in an effort to harm the country because somebody believes that there's some political benefit for that? It doesn't even really matter which faction believes that. You always have that concern. And did we learn our lessons from COVID and not overreacting and implementing horrific public policy? That's an issue. You also have the genuine threats that exist as we're trying to deport all kinds of criminals and bad people out of this country. If you do have guys like this terrorist guy that attacked in New Orleans, if there's a lot of people like that in our country, and they're willing to go out and do some bigger attack, maybe more on what happened to Mumbai or some type of attack like that, it changes the country. It really does, especially if you had a whole bunch of them. 9/11 changed America. There's no doubt that it did. And not all those changes were good. A lot of changes were bad. The Patriot Act was terrible. I mean, there's all kinds of things that have happened. So you have these things, these other scenarios. You also have the potential that I think bad outside actors angry at Trump or angry at America, both domestic and foreign. I don't know. It's hard to know for sure because I think there's a lot of stuff that goes on that's not really properly understood, but maybe they decided to take down the power grid for a year. I've had videos discussing some of the problems of the power grid. Maybe they decided to disrupt food production here. There's all kinds of challenges like that we face. Getting through these next couple of years is really critical. If there's some level of stability and movement in the right direction, it doesn't get us out of the woods, but at least it shows a path that we could be on. But no matter what, I think there's going to be economic downturns. I think the stock market's probably inflated. I mean, can we retain value in the currency despite how much dollars have been squandered and printed and bloated in the environment right now? Can we keep inflation from going crazy and destroying more people's lives? These are the things that we have to deal with, and it is not going to be easy to deal with that right now. So, and all those issues are so significant that they have the ability to derail almost any and every political effort, both on the other side and on our side, that could be in the works right now, best laid plans. So, keep your powder dry, right? Always be prepared. That's a great motto. The Boy Scouts have it, and everyone else should too. And pay attention to what's going on in your community. Many of us tend to focus on what's going on in DC and obsess about it, every nuance, even the things we can't make an impact or change. And we tend to avoid paying attention to what's happening in our local community. And yet you have the ability to make an impact there quicker and more effectively than anywhere else. Being on good terms with your neighbors and in connection with your family and bringing everybody together is important. I had a chance to see a lot of family members over the last couple of weeks that I haven't seen in a while. And that's really good. I think it's healthy. Seeing my kids coming back from college and the Air Force Academy, that's a big deal. So it's very healthy and the kind of thing that I think more of us, you need to do that. You don't want to let any of that go. You want to be paying attention to it. Those are the things that last a bit longer than the political mirages that are oftentimes created all around us. I'll be back, as I mentioned before, on next Monday. It looks like I'll be doing my live stream next week. Thank you guys so much for logging in and asking me your questions. I realize there's some I didn't get to here, but we'll have more next week, I'm sure. Let me know what you think of the videos that I'll be launching this week. I'm a little concerned about the quality of the interview videos I was able to do yesterday. I'm hoping that it's possible to edit them into a usable format. And I still have aspirations to use some of that gear that was donated to me in a more effective way moving forward. I am planning on getting back on and using, if Facebook is truly going to remove their censorship, I might start using that more as a promotion platform too again. So, because I know they were heavily censored now. But anyway, we'll see how it goes. There's a lot of work to do out there, guys, and a lot of things to be prepared for. There's some positive things. There's some negative things. So we'll just see where it goes. And I got a feeling this is going to be crazy times. If I'm going to see you in Spokane, looking forward to seeing you out there. I know we're still putting together the agenda on some of the training programs. If I'm going to see you at Roanoke, please come up and make a point of saying hi. And if I see you on Thursday out in Kitsap County or next Tuesday in Redmond, looking forward to seeing you then. Again, let me know that you watch this channel. And if there's anything I can do to improve it, I appreciate the feedback. I am kind of in this review mode, as everybody should periodically, to see what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong, what you could do better, and I have plenty of room to improve what I'm doing right now. Hope all's well, guys. Enjoy the day, and we will see you next week.